My name's Brodie Paterson. I am a Director of CAM Training. I'm a Senior Lecturer at University of Stirling. I'm Chair of a European network around trainers in the management of aggression. There are certain characteristics which are common to good services. There are certain characteristics which are unique to a good PBS service. So good services have an explicit value base. They're very much person-centred. They're focused on kind of primary, secondary and tertiary prevention. These are simply good practice. What PBS does, I think, is provides an explicit philosophy and an explicit values model in a particular way which drives or provides a set of drivers for the service. It's not simply about using evidence-based practice, it's about using evidence-based practice to deliver socially valid roles, to deliver inclusion. So good services can happen by accident, and they do, but we know that actually lots of good services can turn bad. The discussion around Winterbourne is very much to the fore. You need to create a culture. Now, some services can do that really well, and some services find a good one by accident. But PBS, I think, provides a robust evidence base to say, if we do this, this is why we do it, this is how we do it, these are what the aims of what we try and do. It avoids the default scenario, which could be a problem. So it takes, what it does, or what I think it can do, is it brings a robustness to an existing good service. And to a service that's struggling, it gives a very clear value base and a very clear set of expectations and very clear performance measures. There's a good evidence base that says, okay, we can actually measure the fidelity. Are you actually doing PBS? Now, we should be doing more measurement, but what it does, in fact, enables you to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Are we doing it as per the measures? And actually, in fact, how are we doing it in comparison to our service down the road? We can go off and benchmark in terms of what we're doing. The question, I think, is a series of questions you'd ask in visiting a service, and I think it's actually, in some respects, hard to prioritise one. There's a whole series of things I would want to ask. I think one of the fundamental things are, what are your outcome measures? What are you actually achieving for the people you serve? I'm interested in what you do, I'm interested in how you do it, I'm interested in how your service users feel about what you do, I'm interested in the relationships, I'm interested in the warmth of relationships, but actually I'd go back and say, okay, what have we achieved? We've been supporting service users X, Y, and Z for a number of years. Where are they in terms of their networks? Where are they in terms of their relationships? Where are they in terms of the resources? Have we got evidence of service users outgrowing us and moving on? Because the fundamental issue in a good learning disability service and a good positive behavioural support service is we should work ourselves out of a job. We should get to a point that people need minimum supports, and that measure of success is fantastic. It's the notion of this person needed this team and needed this support, but if we provide supports in the right way and they're consistently and embedded in a network of relationships, the person can actually grow and develop to such a way that they actually need less support. So it's like we start with scaffolding to build a wall. As that wall goes up, we can actually start to take the scaffold away, and actually by the time you remove the scaffold, it's as if it was never there. This person's just out for the day. So when we do what we do well, the argument sometimes put in community support services, it's invisible. But it's really important, and it's really important it's there, because otherwise, if we try and build a wall without scaffolding, it'll fall over or it might collapse on somebody. So we need the right scaffolding, we need somebody managing that process. We don't need too much, we don't need too little, we need to find just the amount that you need. There are multiple strengths, I think, to using a PBS approach. Again, clear philosophy, clear values, clear evidence base. Clear performance standards, clear messages for staff. There's a huge amount of clarity it brings to the potential confusion about how we should support people with this thing that we call challenging behaviour. And I don't like the term challenge behaviour, I much prefer the term behavioural distress. The person's behaviour is telling us something. So what it does is provide clarity of vision about how we should do that. It says we simply shouldn't make this up as we go along. If I went into hospital to have an appendectomy, I wouldn't like the surgeon to make up his own procedure. I'd like him to follow an evidence base that says we do this because we need the same robustness of approach in looking at supporting people with learning disability. They deserve the same robustness of approach. I'm also going to tell you, though, I think about some weaknesses of PBS, because I'm a critical friend of PBS, which is occasionally it verges on being a bit of a monoculture, and occasionally I think it downplays bits about relationships and bits about attachments and bits about trauma. I think ideally PBS needs to be a little bit more integrative and a little less exclusive and a little less concerned about the robustness of an evidence base from a purely scientific RCT standard, and to start using other approaches, the case study approach, the cohort study approach. There's ways in which I think PBS could improve, I think could offer a more comprehensive explanation of some of the stuff we see than it presently does, which wouldn't take it away from PBS. one of the good things about PBS, and there are lots and lots of good things about PBS, is there are some really good, accessible resources to learn more about it. I'd start actually by directing them to the Bild website. I'd start directing to the Challenging Behaviour Foundation website. I'd start directing them to, in Scotland we have a whole framework to support and train support staff around PBS. There's lots of good stuff there. What I'd also though is say, okay, it's really good to read a book and we want people to read, but actually what you need to go is go and talk to somebody who works in a service that uses it. Ask them, look at what they're doing, think about what it means for your client. Don't simply decide to use PBS without getting training, without getting supervision, without getting guidance. Link yourself to a particular network, identify your learning needs, look at the National Occupational Standards in terms of competencies, look at what your service is doing. Individually it's fantastic if you want to learn more about PBS, but actually what we want you to do within a service is to be part of a strategy that delivers that knowledge of PBS across your service. If you want to become a champion of PBS though, however, I want to kiss you and have you marry you and have my babies, because we need lots and lots and lots of champions about PBS. We have some, but we need more, or we always need more. There is a literature in terms of change, a very substantial literature in terms of change, and embedding any change in your organisation. And it pretty much invariably comes back to this notion of adopting a whole organisation approach. What you cannot hope to do is simply to introduce PBS at the level of House X or House Y or House Z. What you need to understand is what does PBS mean from your service, from the chief exec to your deputy, down to your service managers, down to your local managers. It has to be embedded within how you think, how you do, how you relate to each other. It's not an add-on approach, it's not a sticking plaster, it's not a product. It's a process, and you have to engage in the process, and the leadership is absolutely central. And we need leadership in terms of product champions and individual houses, but we need absolute leadership within the chief exec. The commitment to that needs to be, commitment to anything is significant. PBS is no different in that respect. Bild would endorse always that whole organisation approach. You can only deliver, I think, PBS effectively via a whole organisation approach, where services try to do it bottom up, or they try to do it in training direct care staff. My experience is it doesn't work. The effect washes out. We have a big literature in training staff in PBS from that bottom up approach, which says we get short-term benefits and we go back 18 months later and they've stopped doing it. But if we embed it within the organisation, if performance measurement gets tied into fidelity to the support plan, so actually, in fact, individuals recognise that they're being supported, that they're being mentored, that they're being guided. We use the same approach to develop staff as we use in actual fact to support service users, and we're explicit about that. So the question about what looks good in a PBS service is a really interesting one, because everything exists in a continuum from kind of good to bad, and any split, this kind of unidimensional, you're either good or bad, worries me a little bit, because I think what you can have are services which are good in some parts of PBS and aren't good in other parts. But a good service, I will be able to go into the service, I'll be able to ask a direct care worker, what do you use, what's the model, what does it mean for the bit this afternoon you're going to go out with Mary? Tell me how that actually works. And the person will not only be able to tell me that, but tell me with a degree of enthusiasm. And actually, in some respects, in an ideal service, Mary will also tell me, because she's been involved in developing the support plan, Mary's family have been involved in developing the support plan. This is owned at the level of direct care staff. But equally, when I have later on that afternoon coffee with the chief exec can say, we know this works, we know we've done the sampling, we're actually measuring the fidelity of this in terms of where we are. And in an ideal world, what I'd say is PBS is enhancing retention, because I've got staff who are getting clear guidance and direction and support, and they're made to feel valued for the work they do, irrespective of the financial issues. And we're able to demonstrate that we've got good outcomes for the people we're supporting. So good outcomes for the staff we're working with, good outcomes for the service user we're supporting, and an organisation which is congruent. The messages I'm getting from the chief exec are the same messages I'm getting from the direct care worker. What I'm not getting is cynicism, what I'm not getting is resistance. What I'm getting are people who are genuinely enthusiastic about something. Now they may have other things, complementing PBS. There may be other bits and pieces they're doing, but they understand PBS and they can tell me what it means for Mary this afternoon. So one of the questions about, for example, the adoption of PBS, or about the reinvigoration of PBS in some services, because we have a number of services that say they're using PBS and are not, would be what would look different, and how would we actually judge whether what we've done had been a success. So we've got previous measures, we've got post measures. There's a whole series of tools that we can use in order to do that. So there's lots of things we can use in terms of behavioural function. We can change staff attitudes. We can look at staff attributions. We can look at the extent of social inclusion. We can look at fidelity to particular models in terms of approaches. Some of the Australian work which was being presented at this conference was fantastic. How do we really do that? And how do we do it in ways which are kind of valid? For me, the bit would not so much be about the quantitative measures, as I'm really comfortable with it, in that I think the service would feel different. I would know the service felt different. It's the less tangible measures in terms of how people are and how people think. I'd expect to see staff who looked a little bit less stressed because we'd given them a narrative to explain the behaviour in the person they were supporting. So they had an explanation. They had an understanding of where this behaviour came from. They had an understanding of the particular journey we're trying to take the person on. We have this kind of clear, coherent, shared vision, and I expect to see less conflict between staff teams, so they're not doing the mad, bad staff stuff and fighting about how this person's been managed and letting their egos get involved. That has been, we've given them something to do instead, and the something to do instead is positive behavioural support. And people, to some extent, I think, want to be told what to do. I think often, in actual fact, in services for people supporting primary behaviour, we've said, could you stop him doing that? But we haven't given them the tools, we haven't given them the skills, we haven't supported them in terms of what they do. Sometimes we haven't given them the resources in terms of staff, and we've ended up with incredibly frustrated, disempowered, angry, burnt out staff who behave in really bad ways. The point made in Winterbourne that, Winterbourne was a bad barrel. Lots of things, I think, which PBS offers us. One thing I think it offers us is we have a huge understanding of the significance of culture post-Winterbourne. We've known about it for a long time before that, but we're even more aware of the significance of culture. An argument I would make is that often in services supporting people in challenging behaviour, unfortunately, the default culture is one that's corrupted. It stops being about values, it starts being about staff emotions, it starts being about how these emotions play out across the organisation. We get complex issues around displacement and transference. They're not managed, and what happens is a whole series of toxic processes end up running all the organisation. What PBS does is offers an explicit value base and a very clear culture. It says, this is who we are, this is what we do. You can't take the risk in a service of not having an explicit culture. We know what that happens. If you're lucky, you'll sustain it for a while, but the default culture is that corrupted culture, and it always sits there just waiting to happen. And it's happened actually in some organisations which have been good. Good organisations can go bad. Winterbourne went bad, and whether Winterbourne was ever good is a whole separate question. But unless you have an explicit values base and an explicit culture and an explicit philosophy, you're taking a big chance. You're taking a very big chance, and it's not one I would support.